Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you guys are looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you check out the Potown store where you can get 5% off with code Omnipoke. Today, Joe and I are back for our sort of regular installment of taking a look at some of the early results from new metas. Obviously this is a bit of a bigger one than usual because this also is post-rotation as well, which is very exciting. So we wanted to bring our usual video to you in terms of what's doing well, and because it was like a bigger deal this time, I didn't know whether we were going to have that many tournaments, but it turns out there's already been 8 post-rotation tournaments, because a couple of places, basically after the big POG championships, a lot of places just kind of immediately started doing post-rotation tournaments. So this is sort of the last week and a half, 2 weeks of results that we're going to take a look at. Kicking things off with the Zach Lesage Late Night Series, and you can already see a familiar face kicking things off in first place, with Henry winning with Dragapult out of, something that I don't think anyone was really expecting.
Yeah, kind of out of left field. I think intuitively it makes sense. Obviously, this being the first event, a lot of people touted Urshifu to be one of the top contenders. I think Urshi and Shadow Rider were two pretty much the top dogs, I think, going in to post-rotation, what people expected at least. So Dragapult having a very, very solid matchup against Urshifu, not only because you hit for weakness on their main attacker, but also the combination of dealing with their Sobbles so aggressively with Zigzagoon, plus your 5 counters that you can place with Max Phantom, and then having quick shooting into the late game alongside that really denies basically every engine. And you can see he's playing 4 Path as well, so there's the Urshifu side covered, and in theory with the heavy Path plus the heavy Marnie approach, you can also try and wreck the hands of the Shadow Riders, because now they have far less easy ways around Path. People are playing sometimes like 1 Pumpkaboo rather than like the 2 Marshadow that we could be playing, and obviously Swell's gone. So basically against the 2 top decks that we were expecting, Dragapult was very good, and actually a lot of other decks have incorporated the Inteleon engine, and naturally you're slowing them down. So I think this is just one of those low maintenance decks. You can see how many ball search cards that are being played in this list that you just get rolling quite quickly. You have a lot of good outs to your turn 1 energy drop, even though you only commit 7 spaces to energy themselves. You have the Fog Crystal, which is a great card. And you have the Intel engine to be consistent yourself, whilst at the same time just setting people back. So it's not only the intuitiveness, as we'll see in later results, but you can see why it kicked on so well early on. But it's continuing over the week to still do well. And I think it's a really, really nice list, actually. Probably the most disruptive list that we have in the game right now.
Yeah, you hit exactly what I wanted to say there. The thing that sticks out to me the most with this list is the fact that we're playing 15 ball search cards. And like my initial impressions of post-row have so far been like whoever whiffs generally starts to lose on the board very, very quickly. So just getting on the board, having the Drizzles and Inteleons to get you, like, to keep you in the game, to smooth out the curve and stuff like that is really, really good. So it's definitely an interesting list. Again, a lot of people, I think a lot of people are kind of starting to think, oh, did people overhype Urshi and stuff like this? But I think what's more likely to have happened is everyone, like Joe said, everyone was expecting Urshi to be this absolute monster with no more Mew in the format. So everyone was prepared for Urshi, and that opened the door for decks like this that were obviously going to be very, very good at countering Urshi. These now are pushing Urshi out of the meta because, I think in the next tournament, or one of the next tournaments, we're not going to look too much at the metagames, but basically this was like the most popular archetype for the next day, which was insane. Like, there was less Shadow Riders, there were less Ice Riders, there were less Urshis. This was the most popular deck. Now, admittedly, it has like 1 new card in it, so it's very, very accessible. But that's kind of beside the point. It looks very, very easy to play. It looks fairly linear, but fairly consistent. And yeah, it just looks to be a great denial deck. It really reminds me of like a green style deck. Obviously, you've got abilities in this one, but it feels like this is denying stuff a bit like greens used to. So yeah, really interesting. And like I say, I think that was one of the biggest reasons why Urshi's kind of been kept out the meta. Though the 3 Shadow Riders that finished in top 4, I would imagine also had somewhat of a part in that. It looks like the first one, when the screen decides to load, was just kind of the standard Alcremie build that I think most people were prepared for. This is very, very linear. I think the only kind of cards of not contention, but worth talking about, are the Phoebe and Palpad, just because they weren't necessarily standard, but they were basically in at least all of our lists. We said if you want to respect Zamazenta, if you want to respect Desi, if you want to respect Glaceon, play Phoebe Palpad. And basically, I don't think these would ever be what I would call staple, but right now there is a huge amount of Zation Zamazenta, to be honest. So I think, at least in current iterations, one Phoebe, one Palpad should pretty much shore up that matchup. I've been playing Zation all weekend, and Shadow Rider has actually been one of the biggest headaches for me, especially if they are playing Phoebe, because it means that you really do have to race them, and eventually they can just get out of range of you with their VMAXs. So I think Phoebe Palpad is a really good tech right now. I think if Zamazenta starts to fall out of the meta, you can start to maybe look at replacing those. But honestly, I think this list looks very good. I still think Shadow Rider has a huge place in this format, and I think it's kind of been in the shadow of Dragapult over the past 48 hours just because of the popularity of Dragapult. But I'm pretty sure Shadow Rider is going to be the more consistent of the Psychic variants, and I think this still looks to be an incredibly strong archetype going forward.
Yeah, I think one thing just to note is the amount of path that is seeing play right now. There's a ton of people just whacking 4 in. So I think if I am playing Shadow, I still want to play one Pumpkaboo, even though it's way worse than the Marshadow. I would definitely want to have the extra 8 outs to hitting it rather than just relying on Training Court. So I think that would be a card that I think going forward, if the meta continues to be lots of Intel Path decks, and there's a lot of reason to play Path right now, like you said, with Zation, Zamazenta being super popular. Lots of VMAXs have to play Path because it's a better alternative to Phoebe, because it also helps against Shadow Rider. So I think there's definitely reason to want to play Pumpkaboo right now.
I think that makes sense. I just took a quick look at the other 2 Shadow Rider lists, and they look pretty similar. The 4th place one is actually only playing the 1 when Alcremion plays a slightly lower energy count, which is a little bit scary to me, because I think one of the things I really like about Shadow Rider is just shoving a load of energy in and basically becoming the new Zoroark of the format. So a low energy count 12 does feel quite low, but regardless, it did still seem to do well. So into top 8, we have one of the Zation decks, Zation Inteleon. We touted to be pretty good post-row, and I think Zation itself is really proving to still be a nuisance in the format. It's basically the best basic Pokemon ever printed in terms of all-round attacking consistency, and Inteleon looks to be a good partner. It's weird, this kind of metagame that's building around Zation, whether it's the Zamazenta build with Gurus and more defensive, or the more aggressive build with Inteleons. Though this build is actually kind of somewhere in the middle. This is consistent Inteleon, no pings, no swords, no Leons or anything. But this is just kind of smoothing out that curve again with the Inteleon engine, which is a more interesting version than I think we've seen as the meta has developed. But yeah, this definitely looks interesting. Not too much to say here, in all fairness. There's a variety of one-of trainers. Obviously, that's allowed with Drizzile, and 3 Shady Dealings. Inteleon means that you can really get away with it. There's the thing that scares me a little bit is the switching outs. Only 2 Air Balloon, 1 Switch, 1 Birdkeeper. Does make me a little bit uncomfortable, but we have access to the one that we need when we need it with the Drizzile engine, so it's definitely more forgivable in the Inteleon build. But yeah, other than that, I think Zation is very, very strong at the moment as well.
Yeah, I think a couple things just to note. Tool Scrapper is looking like a really good card post-rotation, not just for the mirror in this instance, because Toughness Cape is really good on Zation, it's really good on Suicune, but also, there's Tool Jammers in Leafeon, there's Air Balloons in lots of Shadow Rider, and they hate them getting scrapped away, so Scrapper's just looking like a good card in the game right now.
Definitely.
So that's definitely something to be aware of. I'm kind of like you. I'd like a second Birdkeeper. I'd like an 11th, 12th, 13th energy, because Zation really wants to be threatening that Intrepid Sword. If you hit an energy, you become one of the most dangerous decks as a player going first.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons potentially why we've seen straight Zation Zama start to overperform in comparison to an Intel build, despite, there was lots of post-rotation decks or tournaments before Evolving Skies even came out, and that's how the Inteleon build kind of was born in the first place. So people were again expecting this sort of list, but the more just sort of down to earth Zation plus Zama plus thick supporter line, allows you to have more energy cards, which I think is like a really big deal. So either trimming away some of the one-offs or whatever, or just sort of rearranging to try and get even more metal energy is a priority for me for any Zation deck, because I want to play like 13 as my minimum, I think.
Yeah, without Ultimate Ray, you like with this low energy count, you really have to lean into sources. So taking pressure off that with Intrepid Sword is very important, I think. And it feels so bad when you miss that Intrepid Sword energy. Like you do feel very far behind. So yeah, I do like the outs for more energy. Suicune Inteleon was the next in top 8. And this was an Ice Rider build. We will start to see some wackier Suicune builds as we go through the tournaments, but this was, again, pretty standard. It feels like for this first tournament, people were really sticking with what they know mostly. So this was pretty much a straight-up carbon copy of Ice Rider. The Ice Rider line had been cut down a little bit to make space for some Suicunes. They've thrown in a Raihan as well. But in general, again, it looks to be a very well-developed deck in the previous meta, adapted to post-rotation. The deck already didn't have that many pre-rotation cards in it, to be honest. It had like Stamp and a couple of others, but in general, it was pretty much pick up and play from prior to rotation, and it still seems to be performing. I think Ice Rider has now started to really drop off, basically because of the popularity of Zation. It's really being gatekept, but Suicune has kind of risen off the back of that, and people have just started dropping the Ice Rider line and really focusing on that Suicune, which we'll see as we go towards some of the later results. But yeah, this list is pretty interesting, a nice variety of supporters. I do like the high ball search count, the Great Balls over things like Level Ball and more Evo Incense. I'm not hugely comfortable with, because Level Ball and Evo Incense are guaranteed Pokemon, whereas Great Balls, yes, they can get anything, but also they're not guaranteed. But obviously, more ball search in general is just good, so you can't really be too angry at them. And then again, like Joe said, capes are in here to really make those Suicunes beefy. A couple of Path of the Beak as well. But yeah, pretty standard list, to be honest. This is one of the only Ice Riders I think we'll see over the next few tournaments, because like I say, Zation is pretty much gatekeeping it right now.
Yeah, I think it really looks like basically an updated build of the POG 60 that we saw, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially how this looks.
Yeah.
But as you said, the meta's not in the best place for Ice Rider, because there's still a ton of metal around despite the tag teams leaving. The dogs are just good enough on their own.
So then we had an Urshifu, and again, Urshifu had a massive target on its back, so it was unsurprising that it hasn't done amazing things so far, but one top 8 that we've looked at so far isn't bad. Again, fairly standard to what people thought it would look like. Inteleon engine, they've got a Medicham in there, they've got the Raihans to kind of mitigate the fact that we don't have Karate Belt anymore, a couple of Telescopic Sight, just generally trying to win through Gmax Rapid Flow, and in the matchups where you can't deny the things like Sobbles and stuff from your opponent, you have Medicham to try and take 2 prizes and deal with them via Inteleon pings and stuff like that. But yeah, Ordinary Rod's quite an interesting one. I think that's not typical for most of these lists, which is pretty interesting. And also the one Boss's Orders. Whilst you do have you're probably the deck that has the most spread out there, I think Boss is so important that a 2 count feels almost standard in basically everything. You still can be aggressive towards the active. Gale Thrust is one of the most efficient attacks in the game. So yeah, I still would like a second Bosses, I think. But in general, again, just lots of consistency, trying to lean into these Inteleons and try and checkmate your opponent, basically.
Yeah, I think the boss, they're trying to steal a space by playing a rope, or like 2 ropes to be the switch outs, but it can be scuffed if your exact math relies on throwing coach for both targets. So your opponent can sort of play around that sometimes. But yeah, I think Ordinary Rod for me is always a cut here. Maybe you also reduce the research count down, because I know some lists have played as many as like 2 research, and then you play like a Zinnia or a Birdkeeper and really mix and match for the shady dealings. But that's really up to you, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, rounding out top 8, we did indeed have a Togekiss, which I think people were quite surprised about. But Again, if you pretty much carbon copy the previous deck and just change Togekisses for Rapid Strikes, you can kind of see that the engine is almost identical. Obviously, Togekiss letting you tutor for the right cards is pretty interesting. Considering Marnie feels like it's better than ever at the moment, it was quite an interesting call to go for a Togekiss where it feels like your hand is going to be disrupted quite frequently. But regardless, again, did pretty well. Being able to path the peak is obviously a very, very big thing in this format, and I think it will continue to be. In between Inteleon pings and powerful colorless and even the Medicham, you actually don't do terrible numbers with Togekiss. Like it can get into 2 shots, and because of the way you can play captures and play powerful colorlesses, you can naturally probably be fairly consistent and be on the board and being aggressive turn 2, and that means you can be KOing things like Sobble and stuff in the early game. And then you only probably have to go through 1v max. So the numbers aren't terrible. I don't think there's been too much of this since, which is unfortunate because it's a pretty interesting one. But yeah, there's nothing major here. I don't think it's necessarily breaking the game open, but it's definitely a surprise pick from the first tournament.
Yeah, and I think the Inteleon engines, even though they can cherry pick Marnie, there's like big risks for them doing that a lot of the time. So I think you actually get away with this approach, and it's a Cheryl user, maybe not the best, but certainly a Cheryl user where you can try and Melanie respond a future return. So like as long as you've kept up on attachments, you can either use your right hand or your Melanie to allow yourself that Cheryl because you have free retreat and stuff as well. So there's some stuff to like here. I mean, it's not incredible. The lightning weakness isn't a problem even with Jolteon around because their threshold is so low that you can actually be a user. But I think, there's certainly stronger decks out there, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And then just rounding out a couple of the other results, there's a lot more Shadow Rider making top 16, a couple more Zations, a Leafeon, and a Dragapult. So, yeah, that was the first tournament. Going into the Chill Series, I think this is the biggest tournament we're going to look at. And there it is. That's a Suicune Ludicolo winning the second ever post-rotation tournament. And boy, I don't think anyone expected this. This was a deck we tested and wrote off quite quickly because Suicune's damage wasn't guaranteed. So Ludicolo wasn't always doing 320. Turns out just shove an Inteleon line in there as well, and you can math fix really, really well. You also basically have the inbuilt consistency of Drizzile to help smooth out the fact that you're playing 2 stage 2s. And yeah, all of a sudden you've got what might be a deck that I think almost everyone underrated going into this. I was watching a couple of streamers earlier on and they were chatting about the deck. And they were like, I don't remember any content creator rating Ludicolo more than like a 2-star because it seems like great fun, but did it really have like huge applications? Well, it turns out Suicune is a pretty interesting partner for it. And this deck hasn't gone away since either.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we tested it on tabletop, and the thing that surprised me was that Altaria is actually the weak point of a Suicune engine. I thought that was like one of the biggest selling points to play fleet-footed, but Inteleon's good enough. The pings help you out, and just the fact that your bench is littered with 1 prizes, the opponent has to kind of deal with, otherwise they just lose. But it really helps your prize race because they're only taking out Lotads. I mean, that's just really, really good. And you have your Raihan, which can cherry pick rare candy. You have your Shady Deals that can help get your candy incense combos. So you have a lot of outs to just get that thick intel into play early. And Suicune is just a super consistent card in its own right, you know. I'm surprised there's not 4 Quick Ball in this list because it's one of the best activators for discard for Melanie in the first place. That's just a personal thing for me. But otherwise, I really like the look of the deck. You get to play 4 captures, which I'm a huge fan of when you're trying to play a Sobble engine. Just extra outs to get them into play early. Suicune is just a very efficient card. And yeah, Ludicolo is a huge punisher, which is great. And also playing top entry without any Oranguru or anything like that is kind of interesting, but I guess you want to play some sort of intermediary card. No Stadium here is one thing that makes me a little bit nervous, because I do think although you have the backup Intel engine to help going like throughout the mid game, I still want to cash in on fleet-footed quite a lot. So trying to work in some sort of Stadium is potentially reasonable. I'm not sure what the best one would be, like off the top of my head, but that would be a card that I'd look to add into the list at some point.
Yeah. I remember someone saying earlier on, sort of how come Suicune is better than Zation, because Zation surely just has the guaranteed damage, and I think it's exactly because you get to use Capture on Suicune turn 1.
I get that. Yeah,
I think Capture is. I mean, people said Capture was going to be insane post row from the start, but I think that literally is the selling point of this deck compared to Zation. I think Zation would be better if you needed the 2 water for Suicune, but yeah, Capture is just insane because it means that you, like you say, you get Sobbles, you get Lotads, you get an extra Suicune. But yeah, similarly to you, I would also like a few more switch outs as well, just because I'd like to also cash in on fleet-footed here and there. There's only literal switch outs. There's only one rope, which is pretty scary. Obviously, your Suicunes are somewhat expected to die because they're only on 2/10, but equally we're playing Capes of Toughness to try and keep them alive, which means you can't move them because we don't have air balloons. So it feels like this really does have something there, and I do actually really want to test this, but I'm not certain that this 60 is 100% perfect for how I would want to play the deck. But yeah, definitely a really surprising entry. Another I think the first two or three tournaments actually had very surprising winners, so that was pretty cool. Second place went to a single strike Umbreon, and I think this is one of the only results for Umbreon without Urshifu that we've seen. This was purely Umbreon, which is really interesting. Again, I think one of the biggest benefits of this deck is the fact that you can play Capture on turn 1 and turn 2 and still attack. That's huge. Just being able to get into the game in this format is unbelievably important. I think we haven't really realized how good Umbreon is yet. It's had a couple of really, very strong results, but it hasn't been teched in everything or anything like that. But I think after playing against it, the impact of being able to Marnie plus boss is just horrendous. It's so scary, and I think when people start to realize that, Umbreon will see much more value. I think they're also incredibly expensive right now as well, which you've got to remember for these earlier tournaments is a factor. But I think Umbreon is still yet to break the mold, but it will. I think the card is nuts, and I think this alone, the fact that it has won a tournament with with single strike Urshifu as backup, but also has won a tournament in its own right, really proves that the card is bonkers, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think the Urshifu, just going back to it, looking at the meta as it stands now, where there's some Jolteon coming through, it definitely seems to make sense, and obviously it's still your best answer to Zamazenta. Obviously you can just use the regular Vs in a Zamazenta Zation fight, but then you're just hoping that they don't hit enough Saucers and Raihan's before you start getting beaten down.
Yeah.
Especially because Zamazenta removes a lot of your energy, which is really annoying as well.
Yeah.
So I feel like the Urshifu, even as a 1/1 or 2/2 count, is justified compared to some of these 4 counts. A 4th Urn seems like a flexible card, for example. And maybe even a 4th Tower as well. You can see those being spaces. Also Piers is an interesting card that I have personally loved in my Umbreon since I've tested it. And that could be a way that you can steal space back as well, out of incenses and stuff like that, to go towards Piers, just to make sure you maintain your board. But yeah, I still really like Umbreon, and it's got some other results, so I think it's still very solid.
Definitely. Straight Zation was 3rd place, and again, this was kind of the pure metal build. This was immediately alarm bells are ringing for me because there's only 3 Zation, and I think 3 Zation is very, very scary. But regardless, you can see the point of this deck. It's 2 lines, there's lots of 4s everywhere. Basically, it's taking the most efficient basic attacker in the game, making it as consistent as possible, being able to build up cool combos with Rotom Foam plus double Guru, and yeah, just trying to basically be honest with the format, make people get into the game, because if you don't, they're going to have to deal with Zation's hitting you every turn for 230. I think the biggest thing, this is the deck I've played the most post-row, and I think the biggest thing for me is Bird Keepers. I think Bird Keepers are insanely important, so I would probably want to make some adjustments to at least add 1 or 2. I think and I also want a 4th Zation, I guess. I've been playing without Crobat, and there's definitely been times where I've thought Crobat would be great, but the problem, one of the biggest problems with this archetype is One, the lack of Pokemon, and two, the lack of Ball Search cards. One, that immediately means Crobat is going to be your active Pokemon far more or he's going to be your your opening Pokemon in far more situations than usual with this deck. Plus two, your Quick Balls really do need to be spent on trying to stay in the game because you're not going to naturally draw into these Zations very often. You need to be using them to find more attackers. So you're already going to have a fairly good board state, I think, if you have the flexibility to use a Quick Ball for a Crobat. So as weird as it is, it feels like a win more card when it should be kind of like helping you win, helping you get into the game. But I think this, without the Inteleon engine, you do have to rely on getting a little bit luckier because you don't have the smoothness of the Shady Dealings engine. So you have to hope that the heart of the cards is with you and you can draw a little bit better, I guess. But yeah, you can see this list just works. It's 4 ofs. It's making your opponent deal with 3 Zations through a game or 2 Zamazentas and hoping they don't have an answer. And honestly, I can't really argue with it. It seems like a very solid concept.
Yeah, I think also Raihan's a consideration card to help you keep that chain.
Yeah.
And when you have Rotom Phone, you can try and put it to the top at a decent time, that sort of thing. So I think, like you said, Birdkeeper, Raihan, those are the sort of consideration cards.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only card that really stands out to me as a space is Third Air Balloon. That could easily be cut, especially if you're adding in keepers. Outside of that, Rotom Phone doesn't necessarily have to be a 4 of. Guru doesn't have to be a 2 of. It could just be 1 and a reduced phone count and just have high supporters. Those are the kind of things I've been playing around with.
Yep.
But yeah, very solid concept, and I don't see it going anywhere. No. And it's probably going to be a reason why Path is going to maintain in the format in a lot of these VMAX decks.
Yeah, I think so. And then finally, it was another Ice Rider rounding out top 4. Again, pretty standard, nothing too much to say here. Slightly heavier Ice Rider count over the Suicune, but in general, pretty standard stuff. So can't really fault it. The reason why I'm skipping through these a little bit quicker is because we have a hell of a lot of lists to look at today. But you can see the rest of top 8 and top 16 here. There's another couple of Shadow Riders. There's another straight Suicune. There's actually a Sableye Inteleon, which is a deck that I think has kind of also caught people off guard, which is pretty funny. You can see a couple of Leafeons and a Sylveon in there as well. So wide variety of results so far, to be honest. Once again, in the Atlas Scuffed Late Night Post Row, this was won by Dragapult VMAX. Again, pretty similar list. It looks almost identical to Henry's, to be honest. I think there's a couple of minor changes. But yeah, pretty standard stuff. So we've kind of already addressed that. Beating out another Rapid Strike in top in the final. Another Zation here and another Ice Rider. Was it Ice Rider? No, it was just straight Suicune. So this was the Suicune Moltres build, which was pretty interesting that I saw. Basically, trying Suicune being the tempo play, whilst you can set up Moltreses for things like Shadow Rider matchups, because obviously Suicune doesn't trade particularly well into those going into the mid to late game. So you can kind of take the tempo 2 prizes with Suicune whilst you're building up Moltres, and then between Melanie and the ability, you can hopefully build up Moltres to try and take out one of the VMAXs, and then you can just use Suicune or Inteleon pings and stuff like that to try and take a 1 prize here and there, which is pretty interesting. I don't think we've seen too much of this deck since, but I thought this was a really interesting concept. It reminds me of like ADP Birds, just obviously without the ADPs, but just trying to be these 2 prize tempo attackers, trying to hit certain things for weakness or just be good attackers. Suicune box, it's not quite as boxy as we maybe expected, and I'm sure there may still be room for kind of a Suicune box somewhere, but yeah, definitely interesting to see this pairing. I don't think we'd tried it with Inteleons and like an additional attacker, but the other interesting thing is like it feels like the Moltres and the Dark Energy and maybe the E-switches and stuff are kind of flex slots for whatever type you need to play. So the core 50 around this concept could be pretty interesting, and then you can kind of just splash in whatever's the best counter, whether it's like Victinis or Galarian Zapdoses and Auroranges and stuff like that. It feels like this could be a really interesting concept, to be honest.
Yeah, I was really expecting, when we were doing a lot of our post-rotation testing, a lot of our emphasis was on trying to hit 1 or 2 key type coverages, and the format's so wide that it's not actually come down to like the Dark plus Fighting versus the Psychic plus Fighting versus the Psychic plus Dark decks, which I thought I was kind of worried about. That maybe it's because how the format's sort of laid up so far that it's quite wide and there's other factors at play right now. But this is the first sort of type coverage insert that I've seen in some of the top tables. And Moltres is far worse when we have much less energy denial, or sorry, discard, I should say, for yourself. But yeah, still seeing enough success with the couple Zinnias to try and give you some extra burn, I guess, of your hand. And I wonder if we start seeing the format settle a little bit into some sort of type coverage rhythm, something to bear in mind, because I think, again, Suicune is just is a good sort of baseline to work off of.
Yeah, potentially. Rounding out some of the top cuts here, we had a Desi again doing well. I kind of mentioned in the POG video that Desi generally does well in these early formats because people just want to be playing new stuff and don't really respect it. And that typically we haven't seen many answers to Desi. Obviously, Inteleon's a pretty good answer to Desi, but in general, no one's been like hard countering for it apart from that Shadow Rider list that we saw with Phoebe. So Desi felt pretty open. We see Catrion taking a top 8 with Jolteon. And this is kind of the deck of the moment, I feel. Everyone is talking about Jolteon right now. And I think, at least for me, it's off the back of Suicune's success. I feel like the Suicune matchup is going to be a cakewalk for you, in all honesty. It feels like it's going to be a pretty strong matchup. And I feel like even some of the Zation matchups potentially could be pretty good because you can be setting up to take 2 Zation KOs at once, which seems pretty cool. Being able to Cheryl and just attach 1 energy is also very, very appealing. I actually think this deck looks very inviting. It's something I really want to try out once I can get hold of the Jolteons online.
Yeah, it's really benefiting from Shadow Rider maintaining popular, Dragapult coming out the gate, so Urshifu is a far less appealing play.
Yeah.
Maybe there's going to be that sort of rotation where Jolteon gets that little bit scarier, but as you said, Suicune is popping off right now. Draga and Shadow Rider should be keeping Urshifu sub 10% in play, which makes this valid. And yeah, one of the best Cheryl users. You get to play very few energy, and the energy draw you cards, which is pretty good as well. So yeah, there's a lot to like right now in the meta position. I think it's one of those cards where intuitively before we started playing in these tournaments, no one was really looking at the Jolteon with much seriousness because we said, well, this is just dead to Urshifu. Why would we test this sort of thing? And most of the testing I put in with Jolteon was with Zation as a partner so that you could just have Jolteon as like that finishing kind of approach. I don't think many of us expected it to be the whole shebang, but with the sort of prize denial you can do with Cheryl and stuff like that, it's actually getting the job done, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I feel like, obviously, like you say, scared of Urshifu, and I feel like you do need to... It's not hard to be getting into the game because of an Elemental Badge, and like you say, the fact that you can play Speed, and the fact you get to play Path as well is just disgusting. But it feels like some of the bigger VMAX matchups could be a bit scary. I feel like if Eternatus or anything like that was a bit more popular, you might be a bit more worried about that, because I think, obviously, Cheryl is... You really rely on Cheryl at that point, and I don't think your VMAX matchup trades terribly well, but maybe it does. Like I say, I really want to play around this, and I could be pleasantly surprised. I hope I am, because I think this is one of the most interesting decks of the format that's revealed itself so far. And yeah, then a couple of others. There was another Jolteon, there was a Leafeon, and Cernatus. There was a Pikachu VMAX that made it as well, but let's move over to the Southeast Asia Open, which was just a top 8. Rapid Strike taking first place here again. Fairly standard list, nothing too out there. Interestingly, a Galarian Zapdos. It feels like this is one of the strangest places to see a Galarian Zapdos, because you already have the fighting type, so you're not worried about the typing. You don't have great acceleration, so you really do need them to have like a lot of Vs on board, and it feels like that's kind of the position Urshifu wants to be in anyway. But I guess this helps more against things like Quadzation, where maybe you can't take these cheap prizes on things with Inteleon and Gmax Rapid Flow, so you just need kind of a consistent get things into range for 1 energy, which is interesting. I'm not sold on it. I don't think it's particularly strong, but that being said, it's in a deck that looks to be strong, so it's kind of forgiven to be able to play something like this. Again, other than that, pretty standard. A couple of Raihan, a couple of one-of support cards, things like NG Search, Tool Scrapper, Net to get you certain things in certain situations. One Path is also interesting. I've seen Path dipping in and out of Urshi lists over the past couple of weeks, mainly in all honesty as a 1 count. But it's interesting that there are some doing well with a 1 count, because I think it could be pretty interesting trying to checkmate your opponent and also put a Path of the Peak down, maybe even a Marnie as well, just to basically say, I have a very solid game plan and I'm going to give you as little as a small amount of options as possible to get out of it. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think both those texts are to help you get through Zam, the Zapdos and the
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we have another.
That's certainly one of your worst matchups.
Yeah, I feel like Zam is. It's another deck that kind of has no answer to Zam outside of Inteleons, so yeah, makes sense.
They play heavy Cave as well, so they heal off all the pings. Yeah,
not nice. Rounding that out, there was another Ice Rider, another Zation. There was a Tornadus that we'll take a quick look at, because again, there's another one that I don't think anyone expected.
Oh boy.
Basically filling the role of like Single Strike with the Umbreon partner. Obviously, you don't have any type coverage with Tornadus, but you don't have the fighting typing. But Tornadus' attack does 240 base, so with a couple of Single Strikes and a couple of Power Colorless, it's actually a large amount of damage. In all honesty, it's pretty scary. You need obviously 4 to be able to get into 320 range, which normally would be like absurd. You wouldn't get 4 Single Strike energy on, but the fact you have 7 essentially with powerful colorless means that it's actually not unrealistic that you can push into one shot range, which is pretty funny. And again, it's another deck that gets to play capture, which I think is just so appealing right now. So yeah, looks pretty consistent, to be honest. 4 Tower of Darkness giving you a lot of consistency as well. Looks pretty cool. And yeah, again, rounding stuff off, there was another Dragapult, there was another Jolteon, another Zation, and another Urshifu. So again, really varied results. Another different deck winning, Mr. Stefan IVanov, taking down a tournament with Single Strike. I think this was kind of more how we envisioned the deck over in our early testing. Maybe a slightly smaller emphasis on the Urshifu line, but regardless, basically hitting both of those type coverages. And honestly,
big Urshifu.
Yeah, exactly.
He wants to turn 1 Impact Blow. So the build that he's playing is he's trying to get an Umbreon down, but use his attachment on an Urshifu, so that Impact Blow does that 220 quite easily.
Yeah.
With either double Houndoom or attach Houndoom. So that's kind of the biggest issue of Umbreon VMAX, is that your max arc, I think it is, or whatever, does the 160 base, so you don't actually get to KO the evolving Vs, whereas going heavy on the basic Urshifu allows that. So I think it's a really smart way from Stefan, because these excess Urshifus, you obviously want to have them for the early game tempo, but then you can just tower the rest away. They're like not dead. So I really like his split. I think it's super intelligent.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very crafty list, because you can try and force an awkward prize map as well into people. So I really like what he's done with the 60. I think it's just excellent way to build this.
Definitely. And another thing about this deck as well, I think, is it has one of the best Zation matchups right now. Zations cannot get through to Single Strike Urshis very well. They can't even wall you with Zamazenta, because you just blow through them. You can target exactly what they're powering up on the bench with Metal Sources and Intrepid Swords with Umbreon. I think this has a brilliant Zation matchup right now, which is very, very important, I think. And I think this is another one, a bit like Jolteon, that's kind of the hot topic right now. A lot of people are like really playing this in a lot of tournaments and still doing well with it as well. It's not just Stefan, it's a lot of people are doing well with his list as well. So yeah, I think it looks to be a great meta call. I don't know whether it will solidify itself as a pillar of the meta, but I think right now, in terms of what's going on with what decks are being popular, it's very, very well placed, to be honest. And I really like the whole concept behind it. It's pretty impressive. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. We've got another Dragapult finishing second, another Suicune Ludicolo. So it's not just It wasn't just a one-trick pony. It did do well again, and then a Shadow Rider finishing in 4th. Again, I've been saying it kind of this whole time, but you can really see the diversity of what's doing well at the moment. I think it's a mix of things like tag teams were very, very popular and very, very strong, so this has opened the format wide open. But obviously this is also the early weeks where people are just really trying absolutely everything. So yeah, we have Urshifu winning the PTCGO League Standard post-rotation.
Let's quickly look at Sylveon, because it's Sylveon, right?
I think there was...
Yeah, it made top 8. Have we not looked at Sylveon yet? It was in 5th place.
Yeah,
just wanted to quickly touch on it, just because
got it.
This is a interesting type coverage box again. I feel like in a format as wide as this, it's kind of weird to be type coverage boxy, but this is basically how we expected Sylveon to really be. Hyper Potion is kind of the spiciest card, which is pretty annoying for Dragapult as well as Urshifu. And you can just get rid of a Rapid Strike Energy, right, on your Sylveon, which is pretty good. And you have the Moltres Z-Switch combo. So there's some interesting stuff going on here, trying to counter the meta. And obviously you have the badges to reduce Sylveon, the amount of prize it gives up, into just like the general matchups. And Sylveon's not like the top of the meta, but it's certainly an interesting deck that can fight like a lot of archetypes just by the nature of the trio that you're trying to play.
Well, it's like you said, it's very good at dealing with whatever the meta is bringing. You'll see from this, you'll see in later lists, I don't know whether any have cut, but in later lists, people are actually playing, like they've put in the Blaziken because all of a sudden Zation and Zamazenta have started doing very well, so that's the answer for those. Some lists like even omitting things like Rapid Strike Urshi because there's just not that much that's I mean there's the Jolteons now, which is obviously it's pretty good against, but so now it's maybe time to put the Urshis back in. But yeah, there's been some lists playing the Blazikens. I've actually played against a list today that played all 3 of them, and I think it didn't play Moltres. I think Moltres was what it cut for the other stage 1s. Sure. So yeah, it's like you say, it's pretty much type coverage box. Double ribbon badge helps you kind of make that awkward prize trade as well, which is nice. And yeah, I hadn't seen this list. The 2 Hyper Potions is very interesting. That was why I initially glossed over it.
It's pretty spicy.
Wish I hadn't, because that was pretty cool. So yeah, nice stuff. Going into... I've lost the...
So we're on League Standard, right?
Yeah. There we go, standings. So yes, here we are. Rapid Strike Urshi. I found where we are. Rapid Strike Urshi. This was a list that I looked at and my eyes were very wide because, as you can see, this is also respecting the Zation Zamazentas out there by adding in a 2-1 Blaziken line, which is really interesting, to be honest. That, as well as this being the first Urshifu Moltres list that we've looked at, which was touted to be a very big archetype when, again, everyone kind of thought we were going to be playing rock, paper, scissors, essentially, with the format. I think Urshifu Moltres looks... a lot of people were talking about it, even with and without Inteleon. This list feels like it's trying to do a bit of everything, which scares me, because, as you can see, that means we've eaten into the counts of things like Level Ball and such. And one really appealing thing about Urshifu right now, I think, is the Inteleon engine. So I'm not hugely comfortable with trying to do everything, and I think it gets to a point where you do just have to say, if I hit the bad matchups, I hit the bad matchups. I can't tech for all of them. But it does potentially open the door for Blaziken coming back into the format if Zation and Zamazenta are still here to stay, because obviously you can deal with them pretty efficiently. I don't think, like I say, I'd try and add in the Moltres stuff. I feel like I'd just play those as my anti-meta picks or anti-meta techs. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Other than that, the list looks pretty standard. Like I say, some awkward accounts here and there.
We didn't actually learn anything from this 60 because he didn't face any Psychic deck and he didn't face any Zation deck. So we don't know if these techs worked or not. I found that funny.
That's quite sad. Yeah,
it would 10-1 record. He didn't we still don't know if they were worthwhile or not.
But yeah, you can see another Jolteon and Inteleon doing well. This Victini list is one of the more interesting ones. This has really popped up over the past few days. Basically, just Quad Victini. Obviously, Victini was doing well pre-rotation anyway, but post-rotation, the meta has been blown wide open for it because there's no more tag teams, there's no more Dedenne to wall you or anything like that. Literally everything is open for you to just max victory on turn 2 now, which is pretty scary, and this deck just looks to do it as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. It's got 4 boss, 4 gear, 12 energy. Again, it's just 4 obs, making sure you hit the cards you need. In the matchups where you're not absolutely blowing stuff up, you can Yell Grunt, Fan of Waves, Crushing Hammer, Rugged Helmet, and get rid of all of their energy. This looks to be pretty annoying. I'm hoping this doesn't take off too much, because this looks to be the next kind of disruption deck that I don't think looks particularly fun to play against. I'm not sure where it will settle. It's interesting that this is still doing super well with so much Suicune right now, but you do kind of trade into Suicunes. The thing is, obviously, they trade up with you, but you can, again, keep them honest, really apply pressure to them, and if they ever miss Melanie, basically, they're going to be on the back foot. So, even in the matchup where I think you are going to be the most scared because of how efficient the Suicunes trade into you, you probably still have a fairly strong matchup. And even with all of the like hammer disruption and stuff like that, you can maybe even really put even more pressure on the Melanies and really keep them honest.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of showing us the recipe of Path Marnie wins a huge amount of games anyway, and the hammers add to that even more. So much so that there's Yell Grunts. I mean, we tried Victini hammers on tabletop and stuff, normally with some other cards, not just like maxing out the copies of gear and whatnot, but it just means you hit that boss on turn 2, you hit that Marnie when you need to, so it has a lot of reach, which I think is really solid, and you've got some heat fires to try and offset maybe some intel pings or whatnot, keep yourself that little bit chunkier. Yeah, so it's interesting. I do think there's certainly a spot for Victini in the format. I'm definitely going to be trying it out and testing around with it because, like you said, there's the benefit of the Zation Zama decks right now. Suicune is a worry. Inteleon just in general is a worry. So finding ways around that is going to be important. I really want to try out a Jolteon build of Victini, which is using the Memory Capsule Jolteon. So that's something that I'm going to be exploring this week for sure.
Definitely. One thing to note about this is the emittance of capture energy, which I think I get, because obviously there are certain situations where you need fires with like spreading flames, or there are going to be situations where you want more fires. But the thing that scares me the absolute most about this deck is the fact that we have 4 basics and 4 quick balls, and Zation and Suicune both can very easily win on turn 2.
Yeah, so, I don't think 4 captures right. I think just like 2.
I think I'd like
a sweet spot.
I'd like 2 captures, especially if you're also looking to lean into the EVs, the evolutions. It feels like they're going to help out get those as well. But yeah, that's the one thing that really sticks out to me with this. Is it feels like for the first 3 turns you really are just praying that everything goes okay, and it feels like if you can get 3 or 4 turns into the game with this deck, you're going to be applying a lot of pressure and applying a lot of disruption and really, really keeping people honest. So yeah, a bit of a scary one, but it looks like it can probably do pretty well. And yeah, other than that, I don't think we've looked at a Leafeon list yet, so let's take a look at the Leafeon that finished in 5th place. Again, pretty standard stuff in all fairness. There's not too much to say about this. Inteleon engine is fairly standard, the Leafeon being a fantastic user of capture energy, because you can also get the greening cells to get the other energy online anyway. Again, respecting some of these more awkward decks with playing a Phoebe. No power pad though, so obviously you do really have to pick and choose your moment, and with research and stuff it is a little bit scarier not playing a power pad, but other than that, there really isn't too much to say. I think Galamine is actually one of the a kind of an unsung hero at the moment, because it can counter Path, but also everyone is playing air balloons, right? And it's really, really annoying. Even if you're not taking a KO with Grass Knot, just having a Galamine in play against things like Zation and Zamazenta can be pretty annoying, because they can't reset their board quite as easily. From what I've been seeing from a lot of Leafeon players out there, the Zation Zamazenta matchup is still quite awkward because they obviously trade into you slightly better. And they're playing 4 Crystal Cave and stuff like that. But regardless, it feels like you can just kind of jam people out of not being able to move around with things like Air Balloon between the Galamines and the Tool Jammers. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Pretty standard, to be honest. Nothing too crazy, but I still think it's a fairly solid archetype. And the other thing to note is, obviously, we kind of mentioned how we thought Leafeon was going to be successful off the back of Umbreon, and Umbreon hasn't been like everywhere, and this is still seeing like moderate success. So as Umbreon rises in play, which I somewhat expect it to, I think Leafeon's future in the meta looks pretty tasty, to be honest. It looks like a good archetype.
Yeah, like you said, Marnie Mine is basically as disruptive, if not more, than a Marnie Path. So it's just doing it in its own right that can just buy turns here and there.
Yeah.
And it's consistent with Greeting Cells, so you basically are always in the game. So, and you're not like outside of Victini maybe having an uptick, you're not too concerned, and even if you are, you can play Snow Leaves if you really want to. So you stay out of the whole weakness shenanigans the whole time.
So onto the Yusha Cup. Again, now we're starting to see a couple of the same decks doing well. You can see Catrion actually took it all the way. With his Jolteon deck. Again, I think the list is almost identical to what it was in his previous 6th place placement. So we can, like I say, we can start to see similar decks appearing. We have 3 Suicune Ludicolos in top 8, which is pretty funny. No Shadow Riders until top 16, and no Rapid Strikes until top 32. So 2 very interesting results for those. Again, it feels like a lot of these tempo decks can keep some of them honest, and the other ones you just have to try and avoid. But because these tempo decks like Zation and Suicune and Jolteon are all in the format at the same time, they're all kind of all pushing them all out. They're all pushing all of the Shadow Riders and the Rapid Strikes out, which are all just helping each other. So it's this really weird format where it's kind of, there's these less board-centric decks in terms of like trying to get Rapid Strikes or a lot of energy with Calyrex and stuff like that isn't really happening. It's just being able to get on the board first and take early prizes with things like Suicune and Zation. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. There is a Coco list that I will take a quick look at as well, because I know a couple of people have been chatting about this on Twitter recently, so I wanted to at least give it the light of day. Obviously, we've seen Coco do well in very minimal circumstances, but there have been some highlight reel moments from it so far. And honestly, Paralysis plus Marnie plus Path to Peak again, like adding Paralysis on top of that seems really, really annoying. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a mainstay, but I think it could be very disruptive if I'm honest. And yeah, being able to provide disruption in a format where missing a turn loses you the game seems pretty solid, to be honest. So can't be too surprised that it's done amazingly well.
Yeah, and it's again capitalizing with the quad jammer. So the sort of like 2 balloon plus 1 or 2 switch outs is getting punished so ridiculously.
Yeah,
that you get that paralysis activation a few times, and it's testament to Speed Lightning. It's basically why I think Jolteon's doing as well as it is as well. Just drawing the additional cards at all times is just such good value. So yeah,
pretty interesting. And then finally onto the Sunday Open. This was actually took place a few hours ago, so this is hot off the press. We have a Shadow Rider winning. This again is a pretty standard build, just the 1/1 Alcremie, and just trying to really lean into the Shadow Riders. This is again nothing too surprising to say. I don't think there are any, and I'm not going to go hunting for them. But there was a really interesting Turbo Shadow Rider build that did well in one of the 16-man invitationals this weekend, which was basically Shadow Rider and 3 Galarian Articuno, and then just some scoop up nets to essentially just flood the board very quickly. But that was beaten out in the final to, I think it was Suicune Ludicolo. But yeah, this Shadow Rider build, again, making some spaces on the Alcremies. I think that's perfectly fine, considering Zation Zamazenta is very popular right now. I think Alcremie is a fantastic card in a format where Zation Zamazenta basically isn't one of the most played archetypes because they're not liabilities. but right now they are massive liabilities, and you just want more horses down than Alcremies. So I don't mind kind of teching at the moment and cutting those for in favour of things like Tool Scrapper and such, just to again try and deal with some of these capes and get things into range slightly easier. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff from the Sunday Open. Dimitri Eaton, big friend of the channel. Check out his YouTube channel, Top Deck City. He's been doing really well over the past few weeks, to be honest. Multiple successful finishes, so congrats to him. Again, playing this Jolteon, Inteleon kind of deck. Really like that he's also included the speeds in his build. I know Catrion was just playing the speeds plus regular lightnings, or at least for one of his builds it was. I don't know whether he moved on to captures eventually, but I like that he's included that Dimitri's included the captures, because again, it just gets you into the game. And getting you into the game gets you into Drizzles, gets you into the elemental badges, gets you into doing 200 for basically 1 energy from turn 2. Which is just crazy good. So yeah, I really like the addition of capture. Obviously it ups the energy count a little bit and you lose a bit of space here and there, but I think it's worth it just to maintain that board centric nature of the deck. And yeah, this looks to be a very, very a deck that can apply a lot of pressure very quickly, to be honest.
Yeah, it's what we're now seeing is a straight Jolteon core that's getting nailed, basically.
Yeah.
Catrion was playing the spicy Chatots, but doesn't seem to be a mandatory include. So yeah, just a nice thing. And it seems that the one Cheryl is just like optimal. Turns out just the one turn that you buy is just enough value.
Yeah.
Or just the threat of it being there makes people play differently the entire game.
Yeah.
So that's cool to see as well.
Really great stuff. So yeah, a very varied few weeks, well, a couple of weeks for the post-rotation meta. I expect it to start to calm down over the next couple of weeks, but maybe not in the way a lot of people first expected. So that's quite exciting to see. I don't think anyone expected Ludicolo and Jolteon, I guess, are the two big winners that people probably and
Dragapult, right?
And yeah, and Dragapult of old cards as well. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. We'll have to wait and see. As we usually do, we'll do this for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then once the meta kind of settles, the results are kind of less interesting. But we'll at least do it sort of next week and the week after, I imagine, just to see how the meta develops. But yeah, other than that from us, I've been Jack from Omnipoke with Joe, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video. Cheers, everyone.